Today we're going to look at arms and armour of the Middle Ages. We're going to look at things from right at the very start of the Middle Ages, and we're going to look at things from right at the very end. We're going to look at armour and how it changed to keep up with technology, and we're going to have a look at weapons to see how they changed to fight different types of armour. The first thing we're going to look at is Norman soldiers from 1066 in William the Conqueror. In a minute you're going to see a video of me putting on a suit of armour. Now this first suit of armour is a very early type of armour called chainmail, and what it is it's lots of metal rings all attached to each other, and this creates a sort of a net. This means that it's very flexible, so you can make it into whatever shape that you want, and when you move your arms it moves with you. It's very good, it won't be cut through, so if someone hits you with a sword it's not going to cut through all these rings. The one problem is that it won't absorb much of the impact, so to help with this you'll see that I'm going to start with a big thick jacket on. Now this is made of lots of layers of cloth and it acts a bit like a car's airbag, so it spreads the impact and gives it a bit of cushioning. Now in that video you notice I used two different types of shields. Now the first of these is something called a kite shield. Now this is the most famous Norman shield. You'll see all the pictures of 1066 from the Bayeux Tapestry, lots of Norman knights carrying this. Now what this is it's a massive shield. It's got two straps on the back for me to put my arms through, and another one that goes over my neck and onto my shoulder. Now this is important because it means that I don't always have to carry the weight of the shield on my arm, and I can use my other hand to still ride a horse while this is still protecting me. You'll notice that it's very tall and it will protect my leg if I stand side on. This is very helpful because I don't wear chainmail on my legs. This type of shield, however, is very difficult to use. It's very big and can be very heavy. So what a lot of knights tended to do slightly later on was move to a slightly smaller shield. Now this is a heater shield. This is much thicker and heavier in some ways, but because they've cut the bottom off and the top and made it smaller, you can move it round faster. This particular one has a big plate of metal riveted into the front. Now this protects it from most impacts. These shields are incredibly strong, and they'll survive almost anything, so they're great for protecting you from the sorts of things that your armour won't protect you from. Big pole axes and things like that. Now the armour we're used to seeing in storybooks and museums looks a lot bigger and shinier than the stuff we've just seen in that video. So the next sort of armour to come along is something called plate armour. Now plate armour is made up of lots of sheets of metal that all move together. Now they mimic what your actual arm does. So this piece goes on my arm. Now when this goes on my arm, it's going to move with me, so I won't lose any movement. This is a lot heavier than chainmail, but it does have some great advantages. One of the advantages is that it spreads force. So unlike chainmail, when this gets hit by something, the force is spread over a wide area. Now I can demonstrate this very easily. If you take a hammer, which is a very small area on the end, and you hit your leg, it's going to hurt an awful lot. But even if you use a piece of wood, just as a plate, to spread some impact, you can hit yourself quite hard without feeling anything. That's a bit like how plate armour works. It's basically spreading the impact. And again, like chainmail, you cannot cut through it with a sword. So this armour is safe from being cut, and it's also safe from hammer blows. When you watch the video of me putting on my armour, you're going to see that the thing that I'm wearing on my chest doesn't look very much like how you normally see knights. Now this is a piece of armour called a brigantine. Now, it may look just like a jacket on the outside, a bit like a waistcoat you see in a suit, but on the inside it's full of hundreds of sheets of metal. So this means that it's very, very strong and it protects me. Now unlike chainmail, plate armour is very good at absorbing impact from things. I can really easily demonstrate this to you. So if you were to hit yourself in the leg with a hammer, it would hurt an awful lot because the force of a hammer is concentrated on a very small piece. But even with a piece of plate like a block of wood, if I put this on my leg and I hit it, you can't feel it as much because it's spread the impact. And that's what this plate armour is doing. So unlike the chainmail, when you hit, the impact is spread over a wide area and it's a lot less painful and I'm a lot less likely to get injured. One key difference to the chainmail you'll notice in the video is that I can't put this on by myself. It's a lot more complicated. When you see suits of armour in big museums, they look like they're all one big piece, and you sort of step into it. But my suit of armour comes in lots of bits. It's all tied onto my jacket and onto a belt I wear around my waist by bits of string, and this holds it together. But it does mean that I'm going to need a bit of help. So, as we've learned, knights didn't always look the same. They used different types of armour throughout the whole of the Middle Ages. So what sort of weapons would knights have used on different battlefields? So what you're learning about in 1066 in the Normans, when they were wearing the chainmail, they'd have had much simpler weapons than later on. So one thing that almost everybody would have carried would have been a spear. So, when we talk about weapons, you can talk about them as either smashing things, stabbing things, or cutting through things. So a spear is very good at stabbing, so you can get a lot of force using it forward. Now knights, like you see on the Bayeux Tapestry, would have ridden on their horses and used these, a bit like you see people using lances when they joust. These would have also been used by people on foot. So this is a really easy thing to make. It's just a sharp bit of metal on the end of a long stick. So if you're just a smelly peasant and you can't afford anything better, you might choose to use one of these, because you can keep people a long way away and they're very easy to use. Another weapon that would have been good for people without much money would have been something like an axe. So in the Middle Ages, when you wanted to keep your house warm, you'd have just chopped up wood and you'd have burnt it. So you'd have always had an axe around. Everyone would have owned one of these. And if you're called to go off and fight by either Harold or William, whoever's your king, you're going to want to take whatever you can get hold of. And an axe is very good at smashing and cutting through things. So it might not go through chainmail, but it's going to give the person a very nasty bruise underneath the armour. A similar sort of weapon is a mace. So this doesn't have a cutting edge, it's just a stick with a very heavy bit of metal on the end. And this would have been used just to smash into people. And when this hits, it's going to create force that's going to give people bruises, or it might break their armour open and they won't be able to move anymore. So for knights, the most common weapon they would have carried would have been something like this. So this is a single-handed sword, but you would have had a shield in one arm, and you'd have used this in your other arm. And you could have cut with this, you can stab with this. So this is very good at getting into gaps in armour. It's very good against people who are not wearing any armour. And as much of that, because this is made from metal, it's very expensive. So this would have been something that only the knights could have afforded. So how did people change their weapons as they changed their armour? One thing that people did would be to add multiple uses to the same weapon. So here we've got just a regular axe on this side, so that's still going to be useful for the same things as the axe. It was going to be very good at cutting through things. And on the other side they've added this big hammer. So if you used this hammer and you targeted the joints in the armour, if you can bend the metal of the joints, people won't be able to move their arm, and they're going to have to go off the battlefield. A very similar sort of weapon is something like this. So again, you've got a big square hammer, and this is very good for hitting the joints of the armour, and it might cause them a lot of bruising and pain underneath the armour. And it's got this big spike on the other side, and this spike has been specially designed to try and penetrate through the armour, or if it can't go through the armour, it might be able to slip through a gap in the armour. And again, if you can bend the armour, they're not going to be able to move as well. One thing that people did was started to use really big weapons. So this is something called a poleaxe, and this is really 3 weapons in one. So this has a big spike on the top, like a spear, so you might use that to try and target joints in people's armour. So you can see there's a few gaps under their arms and in their elbows. It's also got a big axe on the front. So unlike the smaller axe, this one can be used with both hands, and that will have a lot more power behind it. And on the other side, it's got a big square hammer. and this can be used in the same way. You can use both hands to deliver really heavy strikes with this, and that'll bend the armour, or it might hurt them underneath so much that they'll have to stop fighting. Now, one thing about better armour is that you don't have to use both hands on a shield and a sword, so you've got two hands free for a weapon, which means that swords have started to get a lot bigger. So one of these is a two-handed sword, so you can use both hands on this, which means you've got a lot more power and speed when you cut with it. The tip of this sword can go at about 350 miles an hour when you swing it, so much, much faster than things like cars. You can also use it as a spear by putting one hand here, and you can stab into the joints, or you can use it like a mace and swing overhead. Now, these big swords, these would have been used only by people like knights, because you have to be wearing armour everywhere so you can get rid of a shield. So what happened to knights? You don't see people running around in armour anymore. Well, one of the most important inventions in human history has been gunpowder. Now, this is a musket. This is from a later period, but it's very similar to the sort of stuff they were using by the time knights started to go out of fashion. And all this is a big tube that you can fill with gunpowder, and you can put a little ball of metal in the end. And it's just triggered, very much like a modern gun, by a little explosion here. So when you fire that, it shoots a ball out the end. And that ball is going to go really fast. It's going to go so fast that no armour could possibly stop it. So knights, there's no point wearing your heavy armour anymore. And another reason why this got rid of knights is because it's very, very easy to use. So to use something like a sword takes years and years of training and practice to be really good at it. But you can teach someone to use this really easily. It's as simple as loading it, pointing it, and then firing it. And that means that you can recruit huge armies of people who don't need to spend all their time training. So knights, they just faded away. They didn't need their armour anymore, and people didn't need them anymore. I really hope you've enjoyed looking at some arms and armour with me today, and seeing how knights changed throughout the whole of the Middle Ages, from chainmail in 1066 all the way through to plate armour in 1485. If you've got any questions about knights, weapons, armour in the Middle Ages, just let me know and I'll try and answer them as best I can.